Hi, everyone. If you are just joining, we are going to go ahead and get underway here. My name is Eleanor. I'm the Marketing Manager at Direct Impact Solutions, and I will just briefly introduce Ben Roberts, who is our presenter for this webinar. Ben, I believe your title is Head of Solutions at Toca. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so Ben has worked really closely with our team. We have a lot of Claire's FileMaker expertise, and he has worked with our team on integrating Toca. So Ben, I will let you take it away from here. If you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to type those in the chat, and we'll also do a Q&A session afterwards. All right, Ben, all you.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Eleanor. So, hi everyone. As Eleanor said, my name is Ben Roberts. I'm Head of Solutions here at Toca. So, I've been with Toca for just under 3 years now, working with clients across the US and the UK in a variety of sectors. So, in wealth, health, accounting, law, all sorts really. And today, what I'd like to do is give you an introduction to the Toca platform, tell you what it is. And in particular, what I'd like to do is give you an insight as to how Toca can enrich or add to your existing FileMaker product. FileMaker is a fantastic product. Obviously, it's used sort of extensively for example, database management, and provide some sort of like UIs for interfacing with that database. What I'd like to do today, in particular, is show you how Toca, which is a low-code development tool, a little bit like FileMaker, can be used to develop applications that are not only sort of useful on Mac or on Windows, but actually can be built for the web, and in particular can be built for mobile. There are a variety of scenarios in which it's useful to have a mobile application that you can take sort of out and about with you. And in particular, one of the technologies that we support is a type of mobile application called a progressive web app, or a PWA. And what a PWA allows you to do is actually use a web application offline. So the example that we're going to have a look at today with an example of how you can build such a PWA in Toca. We'll look at a scenario where you are managing inventory in a warehouse, and you need an application for your staff that they can use as they move around the warehouse and add and remove stock to keep a track of everything, with FileMaker as the sort of central database and Toca as that sort of application layer at the top. So I'll talk a little bit about how Toca interacts with FileMaker, how you build an application and corresponding sort of integration with FileMaker and Toca. And then, as Eleanor said, we'll open up at the end for some Q&A and some sort of broader questions. So let me start first just by giving you a sort of an overview to Toca. So what is Toca? So it's a low-code platform. At its core, it allows you to do a whole bunch of things. Toca is split broadly into two parts. There's an automation half of the platform, and this is where you perform all of your integrations. So your integrations might range from sort of more modern integrations like API connections, which is what we'll look at in the context of FileMaker today, or might go back to robotic process automation, or RPA. So one of the advantages of the Toca platform is that if there isn't an API to get at the data that you need, you can use the RPA, robotic process automation element. And we'll come back and touch on that in a moment briefly. Then on top of that, we've got workflow orchestration, data storage, and pipelines to manipulate the data that you pull via either of those mechanisms. And then finally at the top here, we've got the UX, or the applications layer, that you can then use to expose that data either to an internal team or indeed out actually as a customer portal to customers. So as I said, these are the sort of the four key areas. You've got the apps for exposing data, the automation for grabbing and manipulating it, the integrations layer. There are over sort of 200 pre-built actions and integrations in the platform that you can use to actually grab and manipulate that data. And then finally, we also have a development toolkit, which allows you to actually extend the capabilities of the platform. So in the case that we don't have an integration, you can actually use development capacity in-house to extend the platform and give that data whatever which way it might be stored. So these are a few of our customers in the UK. As I said, we work across many sectors. We work in law, utilities. We work with a couple of charities as well. So you can see prostate cancer there, UK there. And in particular, one of the our sort of most recent endeavors working with DIS in the US was with a company called LaboCI, who handle visa applications. And the big problem for them was that they handle hundreds of these such applications on a regular basis. It's a hugely manual process. And they store all of their data. Fundamentally, they use FileMaker to store all of their sort of account data. But their basic problem was it was taking a lot of human time to take that data out of FileMaker and then input it into various sort of government websites to process that application. And so what they were able to do was, with Toca, pull data out of FileMaker as it landed in that database, and then use the robotic process automation to actually automate the entry of that data into these sort of government forms online. And it's, as you can see here, the manual time here saved is large, with a sort of a massive return on investment as well, because of the human time saved. So this is one such example of how you can use Toca successfully in combination with FileMaker to actually, really speed up operations within your business. So what we'll do is we'll step across and we'll have a look at the platform itself. So this is the Toca platform, and this is the sort of the landing page. When you build in Toca, as I said, there are two halves that you sort of build in. You have your automation, which is all of your back-end processing and integration layer. And then you've got your applications where you expose that data and indeed inject data into the automation. So if we look at an example of one such automation project here in the back end, you can see this is my DIS webinar automation project. And in particular, when I'm working in automation, I'm working with these 4 key entities. So I have activities, which are essentially small units of automation that allow me to perform a specific task. So you can see here, I've got some such activities here. You've got workflows where you then pull those activities into a cohesive business flow. So for example, here you can see I've got a workflow that's going to pull some data from FileMaker, and another workflow that's going to push some data into FileMaker. You've got data stores which allow persistent or temporary data storage, and we have 2 technologies there. We have sort of like I think Azure blob storage style unstructured database, and then also SQL style structured data storage as well. And again, we'll look at how I've used that in this particular instance to interact with FileMaker. So that's your backend layer. On the other side, you have your applications. So this is where you can build your apps, build the various pages out, set user authentication if you'd like to, provide access to the databases and the sort of the business processes in your automation that the app can run, and do things like set your theming, for example, as well here. So the example that we'll look at then, as I said, so what I've done here is I've built an application for a hypothetical company here that wants to manage their inventory transactions in their warehouse. So in this case, this particular company uses FileMaker as their central data store. We've used one of the templated data structures in FileMaker just to show you how quickly you can spin together such an application. But the key thing to note here is that in FileMaker, I've got 2 tables. So I've got a products table where I'm storing all of the various information about my products. And then I've got a transactions table where I'm storing any transactions on those products. So whether stock came in or whether stock came out. So data is flowing to and from FileMaker and Toca here. So first of all, what we'll do is we'll have a look at how we read data from FileMaker using the data API. And we'll look consequently at how we update FileMaker with the new warehouse transactions. From here, once it's in the Toca automation layer, we can then read that data from the data store and present it up inside of the Toca application, and subsequently execute workflows, which we just saw, from the application to then go and make these updates to FileMaker and pull fresh data so that we're keeping everything synchronized. So let's have a look at our application itself. So here it is. You can see I've restricted it to a mobile view. As I said, anytime you build a mobile application token, and indeed any application for desktop or tablet or whatever it may be, you can download it as this progressive web application. So actually, this application will work offline, and when it comes back online, it will refresh the data that's there and also execute any workflows that might have been sort of queued. But you can see my application here. So I've spun up a very simple app. So you can see I've got an area to view all of my existing products. I can look at my transaction history and see any transactions that I've made against that stock, and I can add new transactions here. So you can see with Toca, if we step across and have a look at our products, for example, here's all of our various gizmos. So you can see all of our products, and these are coming directly from FileMaker. I can search through this. So I could search for gizmo, or I could search for doohickey and find the various products that I'd like to have a look at. I can then step into any of these products individually and view the full details. So you can see for doohickey C, there's its name, here's its manufacturer, this is where it lives. And I can see that I've currently got 7 units on hand. So let's imagine that what I'd like to do here is actually update this the stock value. Let's say some stock has just come into the warehouse, and I'm adding that as a worker. I can return to my home, and I can add a new transaction. So I'll select the product, which is doohickey C. This is incoming, and I can add, say, 3 to that and add my transaction. Now, what that's doing in the background is it's kicking off a workflow which interacts directly with FileMaker to add that transaction and then update the product list with the latest information. So if we now step back to our products and we search back for doohickey C, hopefully what we'll see, which we do, is that the units on hand have increased by 3 up to 10. So you can see that that's working nicely. In addition here, what I've done is I've created a space in my application to view my transaction history. Let's just, I might filter that incorrectly. But you can see that the product is updating quite nicely here inside of the application. So what we'll do now is we'll step across and actually have a look at how I've built the application itself inside of Toca. So back to our Toca platform, that was our deployed application. What we can do is look at our pipeline, which will give us a view of all of the workflows that have run in the last 24 hours. So you can see here, I've added, you can see that a transaction was added. You can see when it started, you can see it was triggered by an app user. And then if we step in and look at this workflow in detail, we can actually see the various steps that have been executed here in order to add that transaction to the FileMaker database. So you see here, first there's some sort of step to authenticate with FileMaker. There's a step to create the transaction, another step to get the updated product list, and then an updated step to get the full transaction history. Let's have a quick look at how this is actually built inside of Toca. So we'll look at our automation, and we'll find our workflow. And you see that it's pretty straightforward to build such a workflow in Toca. So you have a selection of nodes that you can pick from to drag into your flow. And then you can drag all of your individual activities that you build into that flow to create your business process. And in particular, you can see this is a very simple flow. It's very linear. So it starts, it runs each step, and then it stops. But there are nodes in here, for example, such as exclusives, which you can use to route workflows down various paths based on prior inputs, and also triggers, which you can use to trigger other workflows. So you've actually got an orchestration engine here inside of the platform. In particular, what's really nice about having the automation and the apps together in this environment is that the apps, as we've seen, can trigger the automation. So you'll see that at the beginning of this workflow, what I actually have is what we call a listener, which allows the application to call the workflow with some sort of request, and then those data inputs are passed to the flow to obviously modify its behavior. So let's step in and have a look at each of the activities that I've built out here. So the first one that we had was authenticate with FileMaker. And you can see what this is doing is very simple. So it's taking some API credentials that I've stored in the database, in particular this password, and it's encoding that in combination with the username for my FileMaker instance into a base64 string. It's then setting the URL that it wants to hit, and in this case, it's using the FileMaker data API to make the request. So it's actually possible using these API calls to directly update objects inside of FileMaker. So you can see it's setting that URL. Again, the base URL is some sort of variable that I store inside of my data store. So if I move between environments, I can easily change my environment variable in a single place and have it update across my automation. It's then taking that variable, it's pushing it into this API caller here. So it's performing a post request, and it's consequently navigating back through the output to get an access token, which you can use for any subsequent calls to FileMaker. So if we run this through as a single step, we can actually see this execute all in one go. You see it encodes the data, authenticates, and then returns my token here, and then spits that out to my data store. And you see that I've now got an updated access token that I can use across any subsequent calls to FileMaker. The next step here is to create the transaction in FileMaker. So you can see that this takes input from the application. I'll have a look at exactly how in just a moment. You can see it's expecting 3 fields. So a type, so whether the stock level is going up or down or in or out, the amount, the number of units, and the key. So which product am I updating? Again, we do the basic steps of setting the URL. This time we create a JSON body. And in particular, what I'm doing is injecting those variables from the input to this activity into this JSON body. So this activity is really acting like a function. I'm providing it inputs from the application, and it's then constructing various elements such as this body and using them in, say, an API call out to FileMaker. And so if we have a look at the transaction in particular that ran just a moment ago, we can see the arguments that came in. So we can see the product key that came in from the app. We see that type field. We can see that amount. We can even see which app user sent the request. And we can see exactly how those variables are then injected into that body and sent off to FileMaker. So it's an incredibly powerful way of taking data from your application and very quickly pushing it up into FileMaker like this. Finally, really then, we've got the step which updates our product list. So in addition to our API credentials, which we store inside of our data store, we have a product database here where we're storing temporary versions of the tables that we are taking from FileMaker and presenting inside of our application. So in particular here, you can see we've got a transactions table here, storing our transactions. And you can see we've got our products table here. And of course, what we need to do is every time we add a transaction to FileMaker, we need to correspondingly update the product. For simplicity, I've updated all of the products in a single step, but using different endpoints on the FileMaker data API, you can integrate with specific products and specific elements. So if we go back to our flow, we've authenticated with FileMaker, we've created the transaction. Last thing to do now is to update our product table inside of Toca. And you see again, very similar format. It constructs the URL. It then creates an API request to FileMaker using a query. So I can again use the data injection if I'd like to that we saw before inside of Toca to dynamically construct queries if I wanted to, based on application inputs. It then navigates through the products which are returned, does a little bit of manipulation to clean up that JSON that comes back, passes it out to a table, and then writes that into the data store. And again, if we run that through in its entirety, we can see exactly what it's doing. So it's constructing the request to the inventory database, and in particular the product details layout. It's then returning all of the data, navigating to find the list of products, cleaning that up slightly, parsing it immediately to a table. So this is one of the really neat features in Toca, is you can take API data and quickly manipulate it into a tabular format, and then it's overwriting that in the data store. And you can see if we look back at our product database, that's exactly what we have. We have our table here. So actually, one of the key advantages of Toca is you move very quickly, especially when it comes to integrating with API systems such as FileMaker, because inside of each of these activities, as you've seen, you've got a range of functions which you can use to quickly grab and manipulate the data. If I actually looked at all of the integrations that are pre-built into the platform, you can see all of the various groups here. There are over 300 that come pre-packaged with the platform, and they range from specific integrations with, say, Microsoft for Outlook and SharePoint and OneDrive, to Xero for grabbing accounting information, through to data analytics for analyzing and manipulating data, to OCR and browser-based manipulation for robotic process automation, and then tabular manipulation as well, which you can then use to store your data persistently, as we've seen. So a whole range of features here, and every single one of these actions, we call them, which are configurable like so, are extensible inside of our Toca development kit as well. So as I said, if the functional integration doesn't exist here, it's actually possible to add it to the platform using that development kit. So you never get stuck or constrained within a certain boundary. So that's our back-end automation. There is one more activity here to get the latest set of transactions, but it works much in the same way as the call to get the product list. What we'll do now is we'll have a look at then, once you've integrated with FileMaker, how do you actually use the data that you've pushed or pulled and present it inside of that application, which I showed you before. So if we step across and have a look at our application, you can see we can have a look at the homepage as an example. So you can see my homepage here. Here it is. And you see it's actually very simple. So if I look at the structure of this page, I've got the main sort of structure or layout of the page here. I've got some sort of container to keep my mobile app sort of constrained to a fixed height. I've then got my menu or my navigation down at the bottom here, which I can use to move between the various pages of my app. And then I've got all of my individual elements here for helping me navigate from the home page as well. In sort of a similar fashion to what you saw in the activities on the automation side just a moment ago, the application designer is comprised of several app components. Again, we've got a huge range of app components here, which are all based on React and Google's Material UI, which you can then use to create and populate any application that you build. So you've got container-based components over here for flex layouts, for example, for structuring content down or across the page, repeating layouts for displaying tabular data, grid layouts for obviously creating grids, charts for exposing data in a charting format, and then a whole series of other sort of nice to have visual components like YouTube and maps and calendars and the rest of it. In addition, what you've got here, and this really drives the ingestion of data from Toca into FileMaker, is a huge collection of form components which you can use to ingest data. So if we were to take a step across and look at the add transaction page, you see it's actually a very simple page as well. It's got a form layout here, and we can see that this form layout talks to this workflow, this create transaction workflow that we looked at a moment in the back end. And you can see that once it's done that, each of the inputs to that workflow can then be mapped to one of these form inputs that I've dragged in here. So in particular, there's an autocomplete here that reads from the products table and displays that in a list for the user to select. There's some buttons here, which we'll take a look at in a moment for selecting whether it's incoming or outgoing. There's an amount here for the number of units transacted. And then finally, there's a submit button to actually add the transaction. And once this is clicked, it will submit the form, and that will kick off the workflow that we saw over here in the back end on the automation side. So the form is extremely useful for taking data from a user inside of an application and then actually pushing it up to FileMaker using that data API. In addition, then, if we think about the opposite direction, so pulling data, having that data pulled from FileMaker into Toca and then presented inside of an application, we use a slightly different component to do that. So if we look at our product page, for example, you can see here again, super simple page. I've got a text field up here that I use to search. And then here, what I've got is a component called a repeating layout, which allows me to iterate over the products table and then display data from each row of that table. So if we looked at the text component here and how this is configured, you can see that what it's actually doing is it's providing me access to all of the information on any one of those products that I've pulled from FileMaker. And let's say I select the location as an example. I can inject that into my text, and you'll see that it will dynamically take each element of that table and then inject that information with that styling. So I've chosen to present the name of the product and then the part number in combination with the description. And furthermore, what I've done is I've added a little bit of interactivity to this, in that I've set this entire sort of element up so that when it's clicked, it redirects me to a specific page showing the product details, which we saw before. So that's using just the ID. It could be using the product key from the database, passing that to the page, and that determines which product is actually displayed. So if we go back and have a look at our application, here's the products page. If I click on widget D, for example, or indeed, let's have a look at doohickey A, you can see that it's dynamically injecting again the details based on the product that I selected. It's the same format, but there's an ability here to dynamically inject data. This is a very simple example in that it's taking a list of products in this case and then displaying a single page based on that row of products. But it is actually possible inside of Toca to build very complex relational structures using exactly the SQL databases that I mentioned. So if you're building more complex applications where, say, you had a customer-facing element to this and you're making orders through the same application, then you might have some sort of relational link between customers, your orders, your products, and in this way, it allows you to build really neat and robust sort of web applications. In particular, what you can see as well in terms of the data structure that I've created inside of the Toca platform is that I've essentially mirrored the FileMaker database to make it really easy to push and pull data. So if we look back at the product list that I pulled, for example, you can see all I did was make the API call to find the products, parse, get the specific element of that data, which is the list, parse it to a table and push it straight into my data store. And so by doing this, I'm actually making sure that I mimic the data structures that I have in FileMaker inside of the platform to then be presented up to an application. So that really is an introduction. I think the other elements to mention here inside of the application are that logic layer. So if we look back at for example, my products list here, which I created. We've got an events layer here, and I created a very simple event. So I said, when this particular element is clicked, redirect me to this specific products page. That's a fairly trivial example. But again, in much the same way as in our workflows and our activities, there are a whole range of functions here that I can use to manipulate data inside of the page and create interactivity inside of any one of my applications. So I can execute custom JavaScript from here. I can trigger other events on the page. I can spring pop-ups and confirmation modals. And I can critically as well from here also execute any listeners, so any workflows that I've set up in my automation using, say, the press of a button as well. So you've got two mechanisms there by which to take data from your application, trigger workflows inside of the automation, and then in this case, update FileMaker as I do that. The applications that you build inside of the platform by default are built for desktop view. So you'll see this doesn't look particularly like I've designed it for mobile, but you can modify any application that you build to work on laptop, tablet, or mobile. So the advantage of this really is that you can build one application and then have it working across multiple devices. In particular, when you build an application that you move into the mobile viewport, that gives you access, as I said, to those progressive web applications, or the PWAs. So if you visit then the site from a mobile device, you can actually download the application as an app, and it appears as an app tile on your phone. So if you're using iPhone, for example, it will appear on your homepage as an app, and then it will actually, as I say, function offline. And once it comes back online, it will then trigger off any workflows, for example, that were called by, for example, form layouts that were submitting data. And so that allows you to have applications which actually work offline when you're working in environments such as deep, dark warehouses that don't have the best connectivity and the best signal. The other thing that makes application development really neat inside of Toca, really rapid, aside from the fact that it's a build once and a use across sort of any device application, is that once you've built the application, it is literally one click to then deploy that application out to your customers or to your internal teams. So I'm working obviously here in the configuration sort of environment inside of the Toca platform. But you can see now, hitting that deploy button, what it's doing now is it's taking all of that configuration, all of those components, it's packaging them down into the raw JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and then it's publishing them out to this web address. And this web address is exactly the application that I showed you here. You can deploy the applications either on the same server on which the platform is located. So if we have a range of sort of deployments, we do on-premises deployments for our customers, for example, the National Health Service over here in the UK. We do cloud deployments, as we did with Labour CI over in the US. We do hybrid cloud deployments. So if you've got an AWS instance or Azure hosting or something like this, we can deploy the platform out there as well. And once you've got the core platform hosted somewhere, you can then actually deploy these applications out to separate satellites. So you might have your platform on your own infrastructure internally. You might be doing your configuration there, but then you might actually add an app satellite, which is publicly facing outside of your firewall, that you then publish your apps out to. And so in this way, you get good protection over your data in the automation and your configuration in the apps, but you provide that public-facing portal to your customers, for example. You've got the ability as well, as I mentioned, to authenticate all of your applications, either using basic username and password sort of format, or using single sign-on with pretty much any provider under the sun. So we've built, you can build applications, for example, using a single sign-on that interact with Microsoft if you're building an internal app, or Google if you want clients to use it that way, We've also done LinkedIn as well. There's basically anything that uses a given protocol for single sign-on called OAuth2 or OpenID. And so by utilizing those, you can actually build applications then which are properly restricted. That restriction gives you the ability to then set permissions on all of your resources. So if we look at the resources for this application, you can see I've got my database, which is feeding my product data, and then my create transaction listener, which is running the workflow in the background. And what you can see here is that I'm able to lock down who can read what data based on their role as a given app user. So you can see I've got 3 groups here. I've got one for basic users, one for administrators, and one for unauthenticated users. And so using this, I can actually granularly control which workflows can be run by which users and which sources of data can be read by certain users. And you can do that all the way down to individual rows of data in your database. So that's a summary of the platform, how to build the automation to interface with FileMaker, how to build the application to read the data and also push it back into FileMaker as well. I hope I've shown you a sort of convincing use case, a space in which you would want to use a Toca application over the top of a product like FileMaker. And we'll open up, we're probably a little bit early, but we'll open up a Q&A if there are any questions. Thank you very much.
If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and I can unmute you, or type it directly in the Q&A. I see we have one Q&A. Is there a component that allows the developer to paste in a block of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code and run it like an iframe on the page?
Yes, there is. That's a great question. So if we look at the componentry on the front end, there are actually 2 components you could use to achieve something like that. So you could use either the iframe. So let's see if we can find, let's just do a search. There's an iframe which you can use to nest other sites inside of your application. So you provide simply a URL here, like, let's try, I don't know if Google allows iframing actually. So we might find that this doesn't work. Yeah, Google doesn't allow it. Certain websites don't. But you can either provide a URL like this inside of an iframe, or there are custom code components which you can use with JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. And so you can sort of construct various elements of your web page like this. As I mentioned as well, if you use that in-page logic, which is sort of event-based or event-triggered on your page in this environment, then you can also run custom JavaScript, for example. So you can see here, this gives me access to a little code editor where I can ingest data. Again, I could be ingesting it from tables in my database or from user information, for example, or URL queries. I can pull that data into my JavaScript code and then produce some sort of output, which I can then use in a subsequent step. So there's lots of ways to add custom code. Francois asks, will the FileMaker integration be an official integration component, or will we have to build it from scratch for each project? It's a great question. Something that's actually on the horizon for Toca is to essentially create the FileMaker integration over top. So you can see, if we look back at our API caller, for example, here, you can see, like I said, it's performing some sort of query out to FileMaker, and it's providing a URL as well, and then doing some amount of work to sort of pull that data back and actually parse it into a table. So although the number of steps are short here, it is, you are performing the same pattern across multiple sort of activities. As I mentioned, there is the ability to use the TDK in Toca, which is, I think I mentioned, it's the nature in which you can extend the various sort of elements of the platform. So if we actually have a look at that TDK, I'll just log in here. You can see this gives you access to view all of the actions which you use in the backend on your workflows, and all of the app components which you use in the front end for your applications. So if we looked at an example like the API caller, which we saw on the back end, we can actually see exactly how this is built in this TDK. So you can see here, I select my transport mechanism, the URL, the method, in this case post, and the body, etc. And this is exactly what we saw when we opened up that API caller just a moment ago. The TDK here, once you define all of these sort of various inputs to your action, you can then access them directly inside of your code as variables. So you can see here, for example, there's this transport input, which corresponds to the HTTP protocol. And you see it's being used in the first line here to switch as in a switch statement, varying the behavior of this. And so what you could quite easily do, and something that we are looking to do, is essentially create one such action for integrating directly with FileMaker, because we know that it will return data on certain endpoints with sort of very specific formats. So if I query FileMaker, a database, for example, for a specific layout, then I know that I'm going to get a certain structure back. And so we'll be looking to do that over the next couple of months. Okay. Thank you for that question as well, Francois. Does anyone else have any questions?
I am going to type an email address in the chat if anyone would like to follow up or have a conversation about how this would work with your current solution or this integration. You can reach out to sales@directimpactsolutions.com. And I will just put that email in the chat for everyone right now. Fantastic. Thank you, Ben, for your time. Thank you, everyone that was able to join. We hope you found this informative, and feel free to reach out and continue the conversation.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for your time, everyone. Have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you.
Take care. Cheers. Bye-bye.